You built success, but deep down, you know there's another level, and it's not about doing more.
It's about growing with clarity. It's about taking back control of your time. It's scaling your business with intention and creating the freedom to focus on what truly matters.
I'm Andy Schwartz, Barron's Top 100 advisor and managing partner of One Point Wealth Partners.
And I'm Chuck Downs, business coach to advisors and entrepreneurs. And this is the Advisor's Compass, the podcast that helps advisors grow faster, scale smarter, and build what lasts.
Because you've built something real. Now it's time to build something that lasts.
Welcome to the Advisor's Compass podcast. I'm Chuck Downs. I'm here with Andy Schwartz, and each month we sit down to have the real conversations that advisors are thinking and having. And those conversations are around growth and scale and clarity. And so if you're ready to grow faster, scale smarter, and build what lasts, then you're in the right place, and we're going to get started. Andy, good to see you.
You too, Chuck.
Why don't you start out by sharing what's the vision, the Advisor's Compass podcast, episode 1? What's our vision as we're getting started here?
I think that's a great question, Chuck, and hopefully we have one. So to me, the vision is that I've been in this business now for 40 years, and it has been an amazing ride, and I am so blessed. And this business has given me way more than anyone could ever expect. And I would even argue maybe even deserves, although I know you on a coaching call, you would tell me don't ever say that. And to me, we continue our journey and we continue to grow our firm and continue to enjoy, the benefits and the fruits of all that. But for me, over the last 40 years, what has been, I guess, most gratifying is to be able to help advisors along the way. And I have had a lot of opportunities to make lots of mistakes and even do a few things that probably were smart. And I think this is when you and I started talking about this, that if we could share with advisors and if we could help them, and I could do that for, the duration of the rest of my career, it would be so much more meaningful because I've already figured out a way to take care of myself and my family. But what I'd really like to do is I'd like to see how many advisors can we help reach their expectations, reach their potential? And if we can do that together, then it was kind of worth us, being on the planet and doing the things we do and have learned the things that we've learned. There's 3 constituencies, I think, out there. There's the young advisor who is struggling. And even though it's been a long time, I remember I still have those scars. I don't think they ever go away. Every now and then I have the nightmare and I wake up and I go, oh, good. It's 2025. It's not 1984. And I'm not hanging out in a hospital waiting to grab a resident to sell disability policies in. But at the end of the day, I think we do have the ability to help them sort of survive and understand, what's important and why they're in the business and what's available to them. We have the journeyman, the lifestyle advisor who's making a really good living. But I don't think that they really understand what their potential and what the real opportunity is. I think they look at somebody like me and they think, oh, I'm different. And the reality is I'm not different. I think differently. I've done some things that were different than they have done. And we'd love to share that and try to get them to really reach their potential, the success that they really deserve to have. They're great advisors, and we want to take those shackles off and let them really grow. And then my favorite group are the super successful, the people that really built a big business who think that there's nothing to learn because they know everything and they're, they're really full of themselves. And I would just warn them, be humble, guys, because at the end of the day, we're just really blessed. We're really blessed. We're really fortunate. And we should just be humble of the opportunity because if you're like me, I'm a Glassboro State College guy. I was there. I always say, people ask me, why'd you go to Glassboro State College? And I say 2 reasons. I had really low SAT scores and I didn't have any money. And so not coming from lofty places. So, just grateful, what this business has done. And if we can share and help, other advisors, then I'm really excited about, the next 12 months. And all I would say is that if anyone other than, my wife is watching or will watch, if you have questions, we want to really do this to help. So if there are things that you're struggling with, if there's things you can't get your head around, and you have questions, send the questions in and we will address those, because that's the purpose of us spending an hour every month. It's not for us. We can find other things to do. It's really to try to help, you. And with that said, Chuck, I think we can get rolling.
Awesome. I think that there's our first call to action is if you've got questions that you would like us to address, pop them in the chat below and we'll be sure that Andy covers those. Um, I've heard you for over 3 decades now talk about the difference between thinking like an advisor and thinking and operating like a business owner. And I know that pertains to each of those three groups, that each of the three constituents that we'll be talking to. So can you maybe share, when did you first realize that you were running a practice instead of building a business, and what changed for you in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, look, like everybody else, I started and I was right out of college and I was really in the insurance business. So we were really not even in the investment business, and we were just transactional to survive. And so you were just running from one transaction to the next. You had no real revenue, so you couldn't really create any support. But very early on, I realized that if I wanted to really expand the business, we needed a couple of things. We needed more time. And because I only have so much time in the day, we needed more expertise, because clearly I'm not the expert in everything. I'm not the expert in a lot of things, quite frankly. And what I also realized was it wasn't like I had to get to where I wanted to get to immediately. I had time. I was building a career. I was building a something that might take me a 50-year journey. And so my mindset always was, I will be underpaid the first 10 years that I'm in the business. And look, I made $1 million when I was 28 years old. So it wasn't like I didn't make any money, but as hard as I worked, I still would argue that maybe I was underpaid, certainly compared to the way I work today and the way I'm paid. I mean, it's night and day. But I realized that if I could invest in my business and if I could work really, really hard, I could be underpaid for 10 years. And then the rest of my life, I would be overpaid. The thing I didn't understand was just how overpaid I would be, because life today, is ridiculous. I mean, the benefits, the financial rewards the business creates if you build it properly is amazing. And it was way more. I thought it would be really good. It's way better than really good. But at the end of the day, there's got to be some price for that. And people always say, I always say that, look, life is very fair. It is fair. If you put in the time and you make the investment, then you will be paid for that. And if you don't, you won't. And one of the other things that I would warn people is, it's never about expenses. It's always about revenue. And we can't be so prideful, and we can't think that we're so smart that other people can't do something better than us. And I can't wait, every year, who else I could bring onto my team that could do something better than I can do. Number one, so I don't have to do it anymore. And so that frees me up to do the things that matter. And I think early in your career, it's very important to recognize what really matters. How was your day? Mara asks me every day when I get home, how was your day? And what I'm thinking, okay, so how was my day? So what did I do today that was actually productive and moved my business forward? And the reality is, there's very few things in our business, in our careers, yours and mine, that actually matter. Things like, what matters? Did I get any referrals today? Did I open a case? Did I talk to a new prospect today? Did I advance, that client, growth, part of my business? Did I serve clients today? Did I find some money today? Now, there was 50 other things that went on today that I didn't touch, that I'm not aware of, that I'm not even capable of, and it doesn't matter. If I did none of those things though today, and if Mara asked me, hey, how was your day today? Well, I would say, I didn't hurt myself. So, I mean, it's like, I'm okay, but didn't really do very much to advance my practice. And I would say that, early on, it's very, very important to have goals, but specific goals to those things, and to make sure that we're tracking those. And don't kid yourself. Reading the Wall Street Journal for an hour, meeting with wholesalers. I mean, yeah, we got to learn the business, but I would argue that it would be better if we could let other people have those meetings, and we have the meetings with the people that matter, which are the people that can actually do business with us. And so, that to me is what's really, really important. And if we can understand that early, what our role is, what's important, what's efficient, what's the time, the time that we spend that really advances our business, and not, I used to pack my lunch, and I would always come into the office early on, and I'd have like a little brown paper bag. I know the guys in the elevator were looking at me like, this poor guy doesn't even make enough money to go out and buy lunch. And maybe that was partially true in my first 2 years. But I'm looking at these guys thinking, how sad that these guys were they piled to the elevator every day at 12 o'clock, 4 or 5 in the month. The guys in my office, and they spend an hour and a half. And I'm just thinking, holy mackerel, what a waste of time. I mean, that is not doing anything for anybody. And so, being mindful of how we spend our time, being intentional about what our activities are, tracking those things are just really, really important.
Diving in a little bit deeper, because what I know this to be true about your team. Dive in deeper on your philosophy about leveraging your team, about how you hire. Go
Yeah.
deeper into that piece if you
Yeah.
would.
I mean, look, the firm will be $15 billion of assets at the end of this year. And the reality is it if I think back, if somebody said to me, okay, how did that happen? I think back to the people that we've hired. I think back to when we hired Joe Geslow 30 years ago, and we hired Steve Kuhn 25 years ago. And when I think about when I hired Paul Magistro 25 years ago, and all of these people, I remember when we hired Geslow, we were barely in the business. And my partners were saying, we can't afford that guy. And my thought was, we can't afford not to hire him, because again, it's an investment. And so, my P&L now on the expense side is probably about $5 million, and it's salaries. I mean, my chief of staff, who talks to clients but has never. It's like funny. I tease him all the time, like, Paul, we've been together for 24 years. You've never found one client for us, not one. Are you intentionally trying not to find clients? Because doesn't somebody ever say, I know you're in this business, you work for a financial firm, can we talk to you? It's almost like it's crazy. But at the end of the day, he's makes $1 million a year. He has a huge amount of equity with me. And at the end of the day, people might say, wow, you could hire 3 people. You could hire a couple of CFAs, whatever. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I could not have built the business I built without him. And so I never worry about what the expense is, right? Because it's not an expense problem. It's a revenue problem. And if that 5 million of expense helps me create 14, $15 million in revenue, then, look, we all work on a certain profit margin. My profit margins have always been good. My expenses have always been high, but my revenue's always been way higher. And so the most corrosive, the most damaging thing to building a business is turnover.
Mm.
And I have the conversation all the time. Chuck and I coach, and I've been talking to advisors for, almost my whole career. And they call, and I love talking to the advisors. And we talk about, well, tell me about your team. And they'll talk about turnover. And I'll say, well, either you're a bad guy to work for, or you don't pay them enough. And at the end of the day, if you don't pay somebody enough that you can't keep them, then shame on you, because the cost of bringing another person in and retraining them. And by the way, what if they're not even good? And then we have to get rid of them, and it takes us 3 or 4 months to figure that out. Then we got to bring somebody else in. And what ends up happening is, I have this conversation all the time where people talk about, yeah, I had a really tough year, had those stat problems, my business kind of ground to a halt. I couldn't, I was bogged down in doing things I shouldn't be doing. Yeah, we have to basically hire really, really good people. They care about what they're doing, and we got to pay them really well. I overpay all of our people, because it's like, if you're going to leave me and I can be difficult, it's at least got to be painful, meaning it's going to be hard to replace that income. So if I'm so terrible to work for that you'd rather go work for somebody else for less, well, at least I gave myself a chance, right? At least it wasn't about the money. And so, yeah, at the end of the day, but that's really been the most impactful, the most valuable, the thing that I attribute my success to, is the people that we have hired and have stayed and have worked and have helped us build what we built, and that's it had way less to do with us and much more to do with them.
So, Andy, what I hear you saying is, as opposed to looking at, oh, this is what this job pays in the marketplace and saying, oh, well, let me pay what the job pays. You're saying, what does the marketplace pay? Let me go above and beyond that and get the best talent, pull that best talent in, And then and maybe speak to that as well. Is what's the difference between average talent on your
Yeah.
team versus the best talent out
Yeah.
there?
It's
What does that do for you?
20% and they're twice as good. And not only that, but listen, we're not necessarily great managers. And if you're a successful advisor, my guess is you're relatively demanding. We're demanding of ourselves. We're typically hardworking and we tend to be demanding on our employees. It's fine to be demanding on people if you pay them. And also remember too is that, you know, they're in the office, they're talking to clients are calling all day, every day, and they're picking up the phone. And I used to say this years ago, like I had an assistant early on, her name was Rose. She's not with us any longer, but, and I would always say, when Rose picks up the phone and let's say it's a Friday and, I liked in the summertime, try to play golf on a Friday afternoon. And, Rose has to make a decision when the phone rings. She picks up and says, hi, it's Andy Schwartz's office. This is Rose. How can I help you? And someone will say, is Andy there? Now, if Rose's roof is leaking because she can't afford to fix the leak in her roof, meanwhile, her boss is out at the private country club on Friday afternoon playing golf, and meanwhile, they kind of get a sense of that we're making money. Rose can say, oh, Andy's on another appointment or Andy's out with client, or Rose can say, oh, Friday afternoon, Andy's on the golf course. He never works Friday afternoon. I would prefer her to say, that I would prefer to feel like she's not mad at me because I don't pay her properly, and that she would say, "Oh, Andy's on, an appointment. Like, can have him get back to you, first thing Monday, or can Paul help, or can someone help?" Because we want our employees, we want our team to think of these clients not as my clients, but as our clients. Well, if they're our clients, and if our clients are creating all this revenue, and if they're not sharing in it, then how is that possible? And so not only do we pay them well, we incentivize them. We make sure that if we're growing, they're growing. There's got to be something in it for them. It can't just be what's in it for us. And I tell you, I've got people, Kimberly's been with me for 25 years. Paul's been with me for 25 years. Danny's been with me for 22 years. Brett's been with me, one of my analysts, for 20 years. He came here as an intern. Skylar's only here for 8 or 9 years because he's only 30 years old. Rarely does anybody leave. And that has really helped me as well. I never have a year where I'm disrupted because the team has been disrupted. And, it's really meaningful in the long term. If you're building something, you can't have those disruptions. The consistency over time really helps you build a big business.
And what about the mindset that gives you, the confidence when you're going into the marketplace of having the best versus run of the mill average? I know that it makes a difference.
Listen, what's great is whenever I talk to a client, they'll always say, hey, just so you know, Paul's awesome. Or they'll say, Alexis has just been fantastic. Or Danny's just great. And I hear that. If you're not hearing that, because I hear that every day. And I tell them, no, I love Paul. He's been with me for 24 years. He's my partner. We rebranded recently. And, all people were, they said, well, what does this mean? Is it a different team? Did you join? Because, we just want to make sure it's the same team because we love your team. And I know that's not unique in the space. I talk to lots of advisors, and if they're successful, they probably have great teams also, and they understand this. But if you don't have a team, or if you have a lot of turnover, or, you don't have a good team, it's a problem. You can't build a great business without a great team, so, and think about the stress. Like, I don't worry about, not being here. I don't worry about, who's talking to who. When clients call and there's a problem, I don't have to worry because I know it's going to be done properly. And you can demand more and you get much more loyalty. I mean, emails are coming in all the time, all weekend. My guys are answering emails all weekend. Nobody has an out of office reply. And it's not like I tell them they have to. They do it because they want to, because that's one of their clients on the line. And by the way, we're all benefiting from this business, right? We're all being paid, and we're all being rewarded for this business that we've created. So there's a tremendous amount of trust that's developed that way, tremendous amount of loyalty. And it's not just money, it's also respect. And it's also letting them do their job, not micromanaging them, not overruling them, not trying to be, smarter than them. Everybody knows that they run their group, they run their specialty. I might ask questions because I don't understand a lot of the times and I just want to understand. But I'm not, I give them the respect that they can make the decisions on what direction, we go in with certain areas if it's their area. And I think they appreciate that. Everybody wants to feel valued. And so it's respect, making them feel valued and paying them. And if you can do those things, you'll have a team forever and they will help you grow your business.
One of the things you said earlier, you talked about your partners whenever you're hiring Joe and Steve, and hey, we can't afford
Yeah.
this, and your mentality was we can't afford not to have this. What about? I mean, because that's something that it may be different for a lot of advisors that are
Yeah.
listening to this. Maybe they're in offices and they're it's 3,000 one man or one woman
Yeah.
armies
Yeah.
out there. Can you talk
Yeah.
about the partnership, the
Sure.
leverage, the collaboration?
Yeah, one of the things we were blessed with from the very beginning is that I always had partners. And so the idea was we ran our own P&Ls, but we could share, in certain what we might think of as more expensive hires. Like I could hire a head of planning that I didn't necessarily need 40 hours a week, but 10 hours a week could be very, very, important for my business. So I could share that. What I would say is that if you're in a bigger office and you are, one of the one man armies or two or three man armies or women armies, try to create alliances. Don't make partnerships necessarily, because partnerships are very difficult because somebody always produces more than somebody else and it always creates friction. But it doesn't mean that we can't share resources. And if you're in a Merrill office or a Northwestern office or a Ameriprise office, and if there's people that are like-minded and building a practice that you're trying to build, and that there's resources that you need, but you can't quite afford on your own P&L, you should talk with these people because you can hire that CFA that you pay 150,000 or $200,000 a year. But if you only have to pay for a third of that, that's an amazing discounted investment. And also what I would say is if you're going to do that, you have to have the right mindset too. You can't, I watch people and our guys all do this because they've been mimicking us for years and it's what we teach them. But I also watch sort of the wrong behavior where, well, I pay a third, I want a third of the time. So from 9 o'clock in the morning until 12 o'clock, you're in my office because I pay for you. Well, that's all crap. I don't care that I don't take an hour of somebody's time in a week. Think of it as electricity, right? This is the way I look at it. This is my power. And what I want is that when I need the power, I want to be able to turn the switch on and I want the power to come on. If I don't need the power, I don't care who's using the power because I'm not using it. So it doesn't matter. So we have to be able to, be able to share. We have to be able to be, and because there's going to be some times where I might be busier than my partners and I might suck up more of the resources. So everybody has to kind of work together, be very collegial, if you will, be respectful, of each other's time and also be respectful of those resources. But if you can do that, the leverage is amazing. And really the business is all about leveraging. We always talk about there's three things that are really important. There's three reasons why we think that we've been successful and that people should want to be with us. It's about alignment, it's about capacity, and it's about scale. Alignment because we're an advisor run business. So that's who we are. And so we're all aligned. But the capacity part, the problem for most advisors that can't reach their full potential because they don't have the capacity. They don't have they're afraid to take that $10 million statement and those wills and trusts. And because my God, it could take them a week to put this whole thing together. And they don't really have the juice. They don't have the capacity to come back with something that is going to win that business. So you shy away from it, right? Because you have the confidence. The one thing I'll tell you, if you have a confidence problem, you increase your capacity and that you go out into the marketplace and you could basically win any file, boy, does your confidence go up. And then the last thing is scale. And the idea of scale is you got to build something that can be scaled up. And if you can share, resources with others, then that's where, you can really build capacity and then you can scale your business. So really, really important, from a business standpoint, really, really important.
Why do you think so many advisors hit that ceiling in addition to building the team? But what are other reasons why advisors hit a ceiling by staying in advisor thinking mode versus business owner operating in thinking mode?
I mean, look, I think that the first, maybe the most powerful thing that's controlling this, and Chuck, you know this better than me, is that it's really about expectation. I think that the problem is that everybody comes to this business with a certain expectation. And again, if you have capacity and you have confidence, then you can grow your expectation. But I think that we're never going to really achieve more and build a bigger business than we think we can. So where everybody has to really start and check in, with themselves is, what are you thinking? Because be careful what you think about, because it's going to come true, and that doesn't mean that you can say, oh, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be able to build $1 billion business in the next 4 years. If you don't have a plan, if you're not going to do the work, if you're not going to invest, the time and energy and money, it's not going to work. But you're never going to build $1 billion business if you don't think you can. So I think that's kind of where it starts. And then I think it's, you got to do the work. You have to do the activities. There has to be an intentional effort, an intentional, work activity, and it's got to be tracked. So, my younger brother was in the business with us for like 4 years or 5 years. And so I have a twin, my brother Scott. We came into business together right out of college. And then my younger brother, 4 years younger, he came into the business 4 years later. And, the joke in the office was, it's Andy and Scott Schwartz, who is Bart Smith. Now, Bart is smarter. Bart was always smarter than Scott and I, and a much nicer person. Like, everybody loved Bart. He played rugby on Sundays, and, then they did the rugby thing after, which means you drink until, I guess you pass out. But at the end of the day, I remember I would sit down with him, and we would be, it's like, always October, November. And he would come to me and say, hey, I'm like, behind in my goals, and I'm not, what am I going to do? And I'm like, dude, we had to have this conversation the second week of January, because there are certain things that matter. There's an old expression: you can eat an elephant one bite at a time. If you set your goals at the beginning of the year, and those goals really need to be, more importantly, activity goals. Can't control outcomes. I don't know who's going to buy, who's not going to buy, who's going to from a client, not relevant. But I know that I need to meet a certain amount of people in order to convert that certain number of people into clients. And I know that every client it creates a certain amount of revenue. And I just have to break it down. It's just math. Then the question is, how do I make that happen? And that means that every week, there's certain activities that need to be done. I needed to get a certain number of referrals. I need to have a certain number of appointments, open appointments, closing appointments, asking people for money. And then if I was consistent and I really stuck to that, in the end, it kind of all worked out. So it all starts with, what's my expectation? Then I have an intention, and then my activities, are, I'm intentional about them. And then what you've got to do is, every Friday afternoon, I would sit down, or every Saturday, I would say, like, okay, what did I do this week? And I could have an honest conversation with myself and say, you know what, you didn't do anything this week. I mean, you did not move that rock up that hill at all. That rock stayed exactly where it was. You might as well have stayed home this week, because you didn't really accomplish anything. And so we have to be honest with ourselves. And it doesn't matter that we make money every week, because that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is, did we move our business forward? Did we add people to our funnel? I think of the business early on as, I'm moving this really big, heavy rock up a steep hill. And all I want to do every day is, I just want to advance the rock. If I can advance the rock, eventually I get to the top of the hill. It doesn't really matter, day to day, did I sell an insurance policy today and got paid? I could have sold an insurance policy today, made $100,000 commission, and be like, high five myself. What an awesome week I had. And the week could have been crap. And the reality is that what I've noticed over my career is, the biggest problem that we all have is inconsistency. So everybody's capable of having a really great week, a really great month, but we sort of work on this fear and greed sort of mindset. Because if you're not really intentional about what you're doing, and you're not really focused on it day after day after day, then what ends up happening is, you have a good month, you have a big paycheck, and then you're good and you're relaxed. And then what you do is you work like you're relaxed for the next 3 or 4 weeks, maybe for the next 8 weeks. And then what happens is, all of a sudden, you're in panic mode again. And then what happens is, you're in panic mode, you're in fear mode, so you start working again. And then, crazy thing, you start working again, and then money comes in. And then money comes in and we relax. And then you look and you say, wow, I'm like 50% of what I hoped I would do this year. And that's because you only work 6 months. The advantage I always had was, I always worked 12 months. I always had 12 consistent months. I was never the biggest guy in the system I used to be in, and they would track it. And I would typically, at the end of the year, be like a top 20 kind of person, out of a lot of people. And that was really a big deal. But the reality was, I was never the biggest guy any month, because I was basically, I was a squirrel shooter. I was out there talking, I was a young guy and I was talking to people that didn't really have a lot of money. It was activity. It was lots and lots of volume, but I always had a good month. And if I can put 12 good months together, that becomes a fantastic year. You could put together 3 fantastic months, but if you have 9, not so good months with that, you had a crappy year. And so to me, it's about consistency. It's about mindset. It's about having the discipline and the honesty to look at what you're doing and realize that debating with your fellow advisors and reading the Wall Street Journal and going to conferences and doing all these things, having a lunch with an attorney every week because you're center of influence, it's all nonsense. It's nonsense. And so you got to figure out what are the activities that are going to help you grow your business, you know, figure out how much of that activity you have to do on a daily and weekly basis. And if you can do that, I don't care who you are. I don't care whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. You're a good salesperson. You're not a good salesperson. You're handsome. You're not handsome. It doesn't matter. You will be amazingly successful if you can do that. Anybody can be amazingly successful.
I hear you saying two things over and over. It's clarity on the expectations, clarity on who you are, clarity on what your team is, clarity on the activity, what you need to do day in and day out, clarity on what matters most. So many people lose sight of what matters most, and they almost never do it when it most matters. So the clarity around that is what I hear you talking about. And then the consistency of doing it over and over and over and over. I'm curious, and I know the answer to this, I believe, but how many times have you seen someone come, and you've seen a lot of people come in and out of this industry over the last 4 decades. How many times have you seen someone come in and have clarity around what matters most and consistency in doing that didn't end up being wildly successful?
Never. They're always wildly successful. When I think of the people in my old broker dealer, the ones that were always perennial successful, I mean, just amazingly successful. They were the consistent, they did the same things every day, the same things that they were supposed to do. And it's like, they're like machines, and and look, even things like, what time do you wake up in the morning? I wake up at 5:30 in the morning every day. It doesn't matter whether I've got a 9 o'clock meeting or a 10 o'clock meeting. I work out every morning. I mean, and I'll tell you something else too. Like, I hurt my back this week, so I did not work out today. I've really been able to work out in the last week, and I am miserable. And here's my thought when I wake up at 5:30 in the morning: I do not have to work out today. I get to work out today. I don't have to call clients, call prospects, work this business. I get to, because there are times in our lives, and some people are more misfortunate than others, where we can't do these things because we get sick or we get hurt or something happens, in our personal lives that take us away from this. And so to me, I wake up every day with the thought that how lucky am I that I get to do this. I'm capable of doing this today. I'm healthy enough to do this today. And it's consistency. And I go to bed at the same time because I don't stay up till 11 or 12 or 1 o'clock, in the morning, because again, we have to take care of this machine. We've got to, but it's consistency. I mean, even my lunch, I eat the same lunch every day because it's simple. Because my sister orders me lunch, I'm not leaving to go to lunch. Lunch gets door dashed in, since I don't have to have a conversation, that's fine. It works. It's fuel. That's all it is, and I do that. And so everything, we want to be consistent with our lives, consistent with our activity. I just think that's really, if there's anything that people could do, you could be mediocre every day, but if you could be consistently mediocre, really consistent, you will be successful. You never have to be great. You never have to do anything great. You just have to be consistent.
So for the advisors, especially that mid-tier group that you mentioned and the wildly successful group, what do you see happening with both of those groups that cause them to not reach the level of success that they could and should be at?
I mean, look, we talk to advisors. I talk to advisors all the time. We're looking for advisors for our firm. When we talk about, we have the phrase that you're a lifestyle. They're lifestyle advisors. If we're being less kind, we say zoo-fed bears. where people get really comfortable. And I think part of it is because they feel like that from an expectation standpoint, they've gotten as far as they're going to get. They're doing great. Maybe it's all they deserve. Maybe they don't think that they're as smart as or as good as the people that achieve at a higher level. I mean, I don't know what it is, uh, but I just think that's the biggest part of it. And I think people are afraid, because if you're really doing well and everybody's like, oh, you're awesome, you're making $1 million a year. I mean, my goodness, you make $1 million a year. That's a lot of money. And when you think about the average person, you're in the top, more than, less than the top 1%. But at the end of the day, for people that expect more than that, for people that realize, look, I always looked at it. I remember the greatest gift I've had in my third year at the Northwest Mutual. And there's a guy on stage at an Eastern Regional meeting, and he was just a regular guy, but he made the top 10. And I looked at this guy and I talked to him, and I thought, well, maybe I'm competitive, but I thought, well, if he could do it, I could do it. I mean, he was just a super disciplined, consistent guy. And I figured, look, I'm not necessarily more talented than anybody else, but I'm certainly willing to work as hard as anybody else. And so it starts with your expectation. I think then it goes to what price are you willing to pay? And I don't work weekends, and I don't, I'm not a lunatic. I have a nice balanced life, but I am willing to pay the price, to maintain and grow my business. And then what are you willing to invest in? And do you have a vision for the long term? It's not get rich quick. It's get rich slow. It's like there's that commercial now, and I should have patented that because I've been saying it for years, and then the guy's talking about it on a stupid money market. But it's get rich slow. But you're guaranteed to get rich in this business if you can be consistent, if you believe you can. But I do. I think it's a mindset, Chuck. It's a mindset, and it's a willingness to take the risk, to spend the money, or to partner with others, because that's always a risk. To be able to build capacity within your businesses. That's the difference between the journeyman, the lifestyle, the guy that, yeah, he's at the country club and he lives in a nice house, but but not what it could be. Not what it could
Well,
be.
and I think something that I've been saying for years is nothing, and I'm not sure where I heard this. I'm sure it didn't come out of thin air, but um, what most messes with the mind is being or doing less than you can be or do. And
Yeah.
so many advisors, so many people hit that level that, oh, this was my comfort level. They hit it, and then it's just this steady decline mentally. They don't feel the confidence, they don't feel the clarity, they know they're half-assing it, so to
And
speak.
and Chuck, something else too, and we've had this conversation. We talk about this idea of motivation. And people will say, well, I'm comfortable. I'm not motivated by money. Awesome. You're not motivated by it. Here's what I'm motivated by. Don't waste opportunity. So if I make way more money than I need, then that means I can do way more things with that money. And I don't mean for, buying more stuff, because I don't need any more stuff. It's like the hardest thing. I make my kids crazy. Dad, what do you want for Father's Day? I don't know. I don't need anything. I mean, I don't need anything. I don't need stuff. I have all the stuff that I need or want. But what can I do with that money? So when my friends are involved in something, when someone's kid, needs tuition money. I mean, a woman I went to college with, and I haven't really spoken to in a long, long time. And I knew that when I saw her on my phone pop up, I'm like, well, this is going to cost me something, but at the end of the day, to be able to help somebody in a meaningful way, or to help an organization, or to help someone in your family, and it not matter, because I don't consider myself to be overly generous. I give away a fair amount of money and I help a lot of people, but it doesn't hurt me, because this machine I built creates so much money that I don't need. And that, to me, if you're looking for motivation, and you're like, well, I don't really need any more. I'm a simple person. I have a nice home. I'm very, very comfortable. I'm happy. That's great. But don't waste the opportunity that you have to be able to help other people with this business that we've been blessed to be in, with this unlimited opportunity that we are lucky enough to be able to enjoy. Think about how we can share that. That's what I think about. I'm thinking about. I love when someone needs something and I can say, yeah, I can do that. And they're looking at me like, seriously, you're going to help me do that? I'm like, yeah, why not? I mean, I don't need it. I have plenty. It's not hurting me. I'm still going to have some left over. And so maybe what people need is motivation. And if you're not motivated by, some people are motivated by buying a place at the beach or buying a bigger home or whatever it might be. Think about how many lives you can impact in a positive way through your work. I mean, my new partner, Kevin Swan, that's Kevin. He is the greatest guy. He is the most charitable guy. And Kevin is motivated and he works because he wants to be able to support the things that are important, to him and to help people that need help. And boy, that's for me, it's very motivating and what a wonderful, way to live your life. And you all have that opportunity to be impactful in your communities. And what's interesting too is that you get a voice in that situation as well. And it's nice to be able to have a voice, which means you can be a leader and you can be impactful in the communities you live in. But having resources helps you do that. So yeah. So if you're looking for motivation.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. A couple of things came to me when you were sharing that. One was back to being a kid in Bible school, and them talking about hiding your talents under a bushel. Don't hide your talents under a bushel. Don't waste your talents. The second thing that came to me is just, and maybe this is a little bit of well, it's definitely a different twist on it, but you know, Andy, wouldn't you agree that it's very selfish to level off? It's just selfish. You're thinking about yourself. You're not thinking about the other people that you could help. And
Yeah,
so,
you're a zoo fed. Yeah, you're a zoo fed bear.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, how about your wife and your children? I mean, not that anybody owes anyone anything, but how about them? How about, why wouldn't you want to have them live an easier, nicer lifestyle,
yeah,
and be able to do more things and more fun things and have less financial stress? We're
yeah.
making decisions. I mean, I don't, some people definitely have something that's a little bit different than others. There's advisors that have much bigger business than me, and I would say they're probably smarter, which isn't that hard, but they probably are. They figured something out that I wasn't capable of figuring out. But for the most part, the high level of success across the board is not. These people are any different than you are than I am. These are people that have a different expectation. They have a different desire. They're willing to pay the price. And they're more intentional about their lives and what they're doing. And so to me, don't squander. That's the biggest to me. I talk to people and I'm just thinking, you have no idea how good of an advisor you really are, how helpful you could be to so many people, how big a business you could build, and how many people you could help with the results of that, including your family. So yeah, don't squander.
Yeah, you think about, I mean, here's a little bit of a different angle on that, just to add to it is, how many people in, if you, those of you that are listening to this now, how many people if you're not doing your best, how many people in your community, how many of your clients, family members and their friends, how many of them, as a result of you not being your best and doing your best, how many of those are going to meet a crappy advisor and get crappy advice and not hit their goals? How many of them maybe get really screwed because it was really bad advice that they got from someone? How many of those people might, they might meet the next Bernie Madoff and really get screwed? Whenever you sit back and you look at what's it costing my community, what's it costing my clients, my family, my friends to not have me as their advisor, and again, it's not every single one, but I can guarantee you over the course of everyone's career, if they're half-assing it, they're going to have people in their circle of influence that are going to get really harmed and screwed that otherwise wouldn't have if they would have gone all out and impacted the number of lives that they could and should have.
And I would even reverse that another way too, Chuck, is if you're not really providing the service to your clients, if you're not challenging them, if they're underinsured, if they're not saving enough for retirement, if you're not really challenging them, remember, if they're dealing with you, they're not dealing with someone else,
Mm.
which means you prevented them from being maybe with a great advisor if you're not being one. And that's the other thing that's a responsibility. We have a responsibility to be great advisors, to give great advice, not to sell whatever is the biggest commission, not the nonsense I see in the marketplace every day. And I'm sure no one listening to this would be one of those advisors. But it's a massive responsibility because we are their advisor. which means someone else isn't, which means that someone else that maybe could help that. So we have to be fully engaged, which means we have to have teams of really good support, which means our people have to be really good because the client deserves that. So yeah, but I see that on both sides, Chuck. Absolutely.
That's a great point.
Important. Listen, it's important work. Isn't it great that we are in a business where when we wake up every day and we do what we do, if we do it well, it really matters. I mean, I'm not going to say this is the most impactful work because, whoever, saved somebody's life, the heart surgeon or the oncologist, I would argue way more important. But there are very few careers, there are very few people out there that are making a living that do work that is more meaningful than we do. And so the way I look at this is, okay, so I have this work that is crazy meaningful. I impact other people's lives. I've got a lot of flexibility. I've got flexibility to be a zoo fed bear if I want, but I also have the flexibility to build an enormous business. And I am financially rewarded beyond anybody's imagination if I do it well. How lucky are we? And so I don't know. I think also what helps me is my first thought every morning I wake up in the morning, I'm just lucky. I mean, I look over my wife and I just think of myself, wow, how lucky am I that I'm in the position I'm in, that I'm in this business and it all happened by accident. And so again, hard to have a bad day, hard to feel bad about what you're doing. If your first thought is how lucky and blessed and grateful am I? And it kind of crowds everything else out. And I think that's also really important. Chuck was helped me so much with this over the years, with what are we thinking about? And it's really, really important what we are thinking about. And if you have what's one of the movies, I want to say it was the Queen movie, and the father, Freddie Mercury's dad would say, what, good thoughts, good deeds, good life or something. But good thoughts, really, really important, so we really want to manage, what we are thinking, really just super powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And those thoughts drive how we feel. And that's everything, right? So listen, I think that's a great place for us to say, hey, we're going to hit pause until next month. Andy, thanks for all the insights. Whatever, I think a takeaway would be whatever really resonated with you, what one or two things, write those down, carve out an hour just to think about it. And it's not a bad idea. Business owners carve time out just for think times to where you can work on your business, not in your business, and start thinking really like a business owner. So thanks for joining us on episode 1 of the Advisors Compass podcast. And if today's conversation gave you clarity or it sparked a new idea, we'd love for you to subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and share it with another advisor who would also benefit, because when you grow faster, when you scale smarter, and when you build what lasts, you create clarity every step of the way. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time.